So for our children's message, I showed you all some picture books by Chris von Allsburg, and we noticed that in all of them there was a hidden dog named Fritz. In some of the books, he's easy to spot. One of them, he's right on the cover. But in other books, he's harder to find. And when I was trying to find all the characters the other day, it was Molly who found the last one. The Bible has a hidden animal in it, and today I'm going to spill the beans. You heard today's story, the story of Jesus who comes to town riding on a what? A colt, a donkey, yes, for clarification. On a donkey. So he's going to Jerusalem, and before he arrives, he tells his disciples to go ahead of him to go get a donkey that he knows will be waiting for him in the village. And he says, if anybody asks you, why are you taking this donkey? You just tell them the Lord needs it and he'll get it back to you when he's done. In Greenwich, where I was a pastor previously, they have a whole street filled with Lamborghini, Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Porsche dealerships. I'm going to try this sometime. I'm going to walk in and say, I need this car for Jesus. I'll return it when I'm done. Thanks. Can you imagine that? But let us play along with the story. Everything else in the story makes sense. Jesus is heading to Jerusalem. People are excited to see him. They're waving palms. A celebrity's coming to town. All those parts make sense to me. But the donkey, that part is strange. Everything else I get, but the donkey I don't get. How did Jesus know that it was going to be there? Sometimes the stories in the Bible seem strange or don't make sense to us because we read them as modern people. We don't always get them because the book was written, do you know how long ago? 2,000 years ago. When I went to England, I realized how young our nation is. You know, in one of the libraries at Cambridge, they had 1,000-year-old books just on display, but everywhere. And then I remembered being in D.C. and going through the archives, and I said, these are only 300 years old. Now double that, double 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. That's when the Bible was put together. So for us, when we bring our modern eyes to the Bible, it might be as if you're reading it without glasses. But if we can go back in time and learn how to read like the ancient people, the story becomes a lot clearer. So today, we're going back in time, and I'm going to show you that this donkey has been placed in the story on purpose. In fact, it is not the first time in the Bible that donkeys have popped up at very important times. Since we hear this story every year, is this anybody's first Palm Sunday, except Abram? So you've heard every sermon on this. Have you ever talked about the donkey? The hidden message? I bet you haven't heard it like this. So the Bible tells us that the Messiah will come to us riding on a donkey. In Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, hundreds of years before this happened, it says this: Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a... And it clarifies, on a colt. It covers all of the names. Donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now, did the prophet Zechariah, hundreds of years before Jesus even showed up, did he just write this about a Messiah because he liked donkeys? No, there was a lot of legend and folklore behind this idea in the ancient Jewish world of a Messiah returning to his people on a donkey. The ancient people of Israel had in their commentaries that there was this messianic donkey that existed throughout their story, and it shows up at key points in the biblical narratives. When it did, it would serve as a reminder that the Spirit of the Messiah was at work in the world. They believed that the Spirit of the Messiah was the same Spirit that hovered over the chaotic waters in Genesis, and that the Spirit of the Messiah could be seen whenever the Messiah's donkey showed up. In Hebrew, the word for donkey is hamor, and the hamor shows up quite a bit in the Old Testament. Back in the days of the Bible, the animal of choice for all transportation was a donkey. It was also the animal that the kings of Israel would have rode on during coronations. For the ancient Jewish people, the donkey was an animal that represented a loyal companion, a beast that you would always want to have with you on your journey. And so it's no surprise to find that the donkey was an animal that shows up in many of our Bible stories. Have you noticed the Messiah's donkey whenever you read the Bible? Today we're going to look at the Bible as ancient people. We're going to look at the text through the eyes of the people back then. And we're going to look at just a few stories that, there's many, but we're going to look at a few stories where the Messiah's donkey shows up in the narrative. So first, we start in Genesis chapter 22. And this one's going to be just a little glimpse of the Messiah's donkey. Now you may remember the story of Abram when he was going to sacrifice his son Isaac. It says in Genesis 22, verse 3, "So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey and 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac." I know this is a sad story for any Abram to hear about Isaac. "He cut the wood for the burnt offering and set out and went to the place in the distance that God had shown him." You all caught it, right? The people back then wouldn't have missed it. They would have said, "There he is. There's the Messiah's donkey. He's going to assist Abraham in sacrificing his son." And thankfully we know that the angel steps in, stops Abraham. But the key to this story is to show us, and as subtle as it may seem, this donkey's appearance is going to be very important as we move forward. The story is pointing to us that even though the Messiah isn't physically here, he must be on his way because the donkey's here. 7 generations later, we see the Messiah's donkey again. When Moses met God at the burning bush, the Spirit of the Messiah spoke to Moses and told him to go back to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of slavery. In Exodus chapter 4, verses 19 through 20, it says this, "The Lord said to Moses in Midian, 'Go back to Egypt, for all those who were seeking your life are dead.' So Moses took his wife and his sons, put them on and went back to the land of Egypt." And you all caught it. Moses took his wife and his sons and put them on a donkey to go back to the land of Egypt. And this just isn't any donkey. This is the Messiah's donkey, a reliable beast that would assist Moses in fulfilling God's desire to free the people of Israel. So here's a story where the Messiah's donkey is right in our face. You can't miss him. In the book of Numbers, we see the Messiah's donkey in full display. This time he's going to be very easy to spot, and he even talks. The story goes that one of the nations that the Israelites had to conquer had requested a priest to come curse the Israelites so they couldn't beat them in battle. So they reached out to this priest, and his name was Balaam. And Balaam sought the Lord to place a curse on the Israelites, but in his prayer, he heard from God, "What, you think I'm going to curse the people I just blessed? I'm not going to do that." So God had refused. And when Balaam told those requesting the curse that God had refused, they came to him again, hoping that he might persuade God to reconsider. So Balaam thought, I'll catch God when he's in a better mood. He was also hoping to be rewarded well for this, if he could place the curse on this people, on the Israelites. But God didn't like Balaam testing him, continuously requesting from him that he condemned the people he led out of Egypt. So when Balaam was on his way to seek out a curse for a final time, the Bible tells us what happened. In the book of Numbers, we hear this strange stories. Strange stories are always valuable in the Bible because if it's unbelievable, it's trying to get your attention. God's anger, it says this, God's anger was kindled because Balaam was going. And the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his adversary. Now he was riding on the donkey, it says. He was riding on the donkey. And two of his servants were with him. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. The donkey can see the angel, but Balaam the priest can't. So the donkey turned off the road and went into the field, and Balaam struck the donkey to turn it back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards, with a wall on either side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord again, it scraped up against the wall. I think this is a funny story, actually. And he scraped up against the wall and scraped Balaam's foot against the wall. So Balaam struck the donkey again. Then the angel of the Lord went ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and it said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you have made a fool of me. I wish I had my sword in my hand, and I would kill you right now." But the donkey said to Balaam, Am I not your donkey, which you've ridden all your life? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way? And Balaam said, "No." Because of this exchange between he and the donkey, Balaam ends up blessing the Israelites right in front of the people that were asking him to curse the Israelites. They weren't happy with him for doing that. In other stories, we see the Messiah's donkey, who's always at work in the background of key biblical narratives. From Samson defeating 1,000 enemies with what? The jawbone of a donkey. To David riding on a donkey instead of a war horse into battle. And it was a legend hidden in the text, but always there to remind the Israelites that God was at work whenever you saw that donkey pop up. Like in Chris Van Allsburg's books, although all the books tell different stories, the dog Fritz is a character that continuously pops up as a trademark of the author. So too is the Messiah's donkey a character that pops up to remind Bible readers that although these stories of Scripture were written by many different authors, there was always a greater author telling a bigger story. The Spirit of the Messiah giving us hints to when he would finally arrive, riding upon a donkey. Zechariah the prophet had noticed the clues, and so hundreds of years later he wrote about it, saying, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." And now it makes sense. It makes sense that Jesus knew a donkey would be waiting for him in town. Sometimes it's hard to imagine that what God had said in the past, he would finally make it come true. Where did we first see the Messiah's donkey? In Genesis with Abram. And in Genesis chapter 12, starting in verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and you will be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." The Hebrew people had been on a long journey. They were beaten down, oppressed. They rose to power, and they lost it all. They had thought that one day God would send a Messiah on a horse and chariot. that God would send a Messiah with a sword to slay their enemies and restore everything they'd lost. But God said to Abram, you and your family will be blessed, and through you all families will be blessed. The story began with Abram on a donkey, the Messiah's donkey, and that donkey rode throughout the history of Israel until it found itself tied to a stall in Jerusalem. It was the donkey that tied all the stories of the Old Testament together and reminded the people back then of the promise that God made to Abram. That one day a Messiah would come not just for the Israelites, a Messiah that would come to unite all of the kingdoms of the earth together through a message of love, a message of peace, a message of patience, kindness, forgiveness, and grace. Jesus knew that his donkey, the Messiah's donkey, would be there waiting for him in town. And he rode that trusted companion from Jerusalem through down to what he had to face next. He didn't need the donkey for long when he went into town. He just needed to make it to his next stop. It must have been a nice moment for Jesus and the donkey. I wonder if Jesus smiled at the donkey and gave him a wink and said, thanks for guiding the Israelites to this very point in time. And thanks for taking me to where I need to go next.